Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me, and welcome to the Transformational Peace Podcast. I'm Dr. Lee, and today we're going to be talking about healing attachment wounds, a deep dive into the 4 attachment styles and their impact on relationships. This is the second video of a 2-part series. If you haven't seen part 1 on attachment styles, after this video, please go and check out the first video. In this video, we're going to talk more about how attachment styles develop in order to better understand our relational styles. Understanding how these attachment styles interact can provide valuable insights into relationship dynamics and pave the way for healthier connections based on mutual understanding and respect. So first, I'm going to give a couple of brief ideas on how attachment begins. And second, I'm going to discuss the remaining 2 attachment styles, anxious preoccupied and dismissive avoidant, and how they affect our relationships. And third, I'm going to offer 2 practical solutions on how to begin to deal with our insecure attachments. We're all born with an innate drive for attachment. It's what we do. When we have a need or become frightened as infants, our attachment system becomes activated. This leads us as infants to move towards our caregiver or draw them to us. We do this as infants by babbling, crying, loud vocalizations, or being clingy. This seeking closeness for safety and security has to do with the idea of proxemics. Proxemics has to do with space, how we use it, how it makes us more or less comfortable in relation to others or individuals or objects. As infants, once our proximity or closeness-seeking behaviors toward our caregivers is satisfied and safety and security is achieved, our need for attachment is also satisfied. In other words, we feel bonded and our attachment-seeking behaviors for safety and security are deactivated. We'll come back to this later in the video in that it is important relationally both in infancy and adulthood. More importantly, with attachment styles, whatever our attachment styles are as infants, we carry over as the same attachment styles in adulthood. So first we'll begin discussing anxious preoccupied attachment styles. Anxious preoccupied attachment style is characterized by a constant need for reassurance, fear of rejection or abandonment, and a tendency to overanalyze relationships. Individuals with this attachment style often struggle with setting boundaries and may feel overwhelmed by their emotions. They seek closeness and intimacy, but can become very dependent on their partner, leading to feelings of insecurity and jealousy. Anxious preoccupied attachment can be caused by unpredictable or inconsistent parenting. In other words, as children, sometimes our parents may be very engaged with us and there to meet our needs, and other times they aren't due to being possibly exhausted from work or other demands or simply being overwhelmed by their own needs. An important note here. This is different from fearful avoidant in that the parent's inconsistency is different. Parents with a fearful avoidant attachment are sometimes engaging with the child while at other times being harsh or negative such that the child can't predict how the parent is going to respond. So basically, as anxious preoccupied attachment individuals, we essentially feel insecure in our relationships pretty much all of the time. We exhibit a significant tendency to fit in to feel accepted by others. We desperately crave intimacy and acceptance, however, often we feel insecure and ultimately anxious about whether our significant other can or will meet our emotional needs. This often appears to others as being overly needy. Consequently, our ask in our relationships often tends to be overwhelming to our partners due to our unstable self-esteem. This unstable or low self-esteem creates a type of relational or emotional amnesia, like we forgot that we were just affirmed and nurtured like 10 minutes ago. So we have a hard time trusting our significant others, and we constantly are seeking reassurance from them. Ultimately, we feel overly dependent with our significant others, and when they are not completely devoted to us, sometimes we are triggered by feelings of jealousy. We therefore feel adequate only when we receive approval from our significant others. And coincidentally, with our anxious preoccupied attachment style, we don't handle stress very well. Stress tends to overactivate our attachment system, which creates a heightened sense of neediness and overdependence on our significant others. And in turn, we often have difficulty regulating our emotions. We're often at risk for abusive relationships in that we'll expose ourselves to significantly distressing relational situations simply because we don't want to be alone. For example, we'll agree to social outings with our friends that we don't particularly care for just so we're not alone. We struggle greatly with solitary moments. As adults with anxious preoccupied attachment, we're at significant risk for anxiety disorders. A common theme I often see in clinic is often we meet individuals who have an anxious preoccupied attachment style or insecure attachments. And when we first meet them, we often can't tell simply because we don't know them that well. And after we get to know them, especially if we begin to hang out or even date them, we begin to notice some tendencies. Initially in the relationship, due to the novelty or newness of the situation, we may often spend a lot of time with the other person. After a while, when the newness of the relationship begins to fade, which is pretty normal, we begin to consider spending time with others, especially old friends we might not have seen for a while. And here's where things get interesting. The person whom you just met, who struggles with insecure attachments, may often become very clingy or needy. As we attempt to set boundaries and create some personal space, this person, whom we have only recently just met, may become very jealous. And suddenly, this person who we had an initial attraction to becomes emotionally confusing to us. And interestingly enough, this is a somewhat common occurrence. And next we'll discuss the dismissive avoidant attachment styles. Dismissive avoidant attachment refers to a relational style where individuals exhibit an aloof or emotionally distant demeanor in relationships. People with dismissive avoidant tendencies often prioritize independence and self-reliance, sometimes at the expense of deep emotional connections with others. This attachment style can stem from childhood experience where emotional needs were not consistently met, leading individuals to develop a coping mechanism of self-sufficiency. This attachment style is basically a way of relating to others from an independent, distant, and distrustful standpoint. As we were raised by our parents, we were taught not to express our negative emotions, which were seen as a sign of weakness. Also, growing up, we experienced our parents as authoritarian in terms of boundaries surrounding emotional communication. In being dismissive avoidant, we tend to emotionally distance ourselves from others, especially if we are in a close relationship. We learned when we were younger that relying on others for emotional support was not safe and inconsistent. This stems from our fear of rejection, which propels our need for autonomy. Thus, we value autonomy and independence over connection with others and intimacy. As adults, we are highly independent and have a tendency to be workaholics who avoid intense emotions. Our parents were most probably also workaholics who were highly industrial and instilled this type of value in us as children. Consequently, we learned as children to value work and productivity over relationships. And we are usually highly successful as adults and tend to be authoritarian in our work styles as opposed to democratic. We also choose jobs that are very challenging and require disproportional amounts of time, which precludes us from developing any significant emotional relationships. When we encounter someone who exhibits intense emotions, we tend to shy away from them. Even though we seem confident, we believe that we are flawed and unlovable and there's something inherently wrong with us. The fear we feel behind all of this is that when others discover our brokenness, they will abandon us. Due to perceiving our emotions as a weakness, our difficulty is in acknowledging and expressing our emotions, so we typically repress them. With dismissive avoidant attachment, we believe that when others notice our weaknesses, they will abandon us, so we avoid others and abandon them first. And an important note here, when our attachment system is activated, we rely on ourselves for emotional comfort as opposed to others for emotional closeness. Okay, so now we're going to make 2 recommendations to help us begin to learn how to deal with insecure attachment styles. And the first is learn and understand your attachment style. Educate yourself on the different attachment styles. While I'm certain this 2-part video series is helpful, it is not exhaustive. Understanding why attachment theory is important, along with understanding your specific attachment style, can help you understand your tendencies and address underlying issues. Gaining insight into your present relationships with others, as well as your primary caregiver, can help you overcome your insecure attachments. For example, attachment styles can determine how we deal with emotionally charged relationships or conflict. Our attachment styles can determine how we deal with emotionally charged relationships or conflict. Our attachment style will indicate whether we engage in an argument in an unhealthy way or avoid it altogether. And as you learn the different attachment styles, you'll also learn what a secure attachment style looks like in others. Seek out others whom you can identify as more securely attached and create a support system. This could be a mentor, a social group, or even a friend. The goal here is anyone who can help reinforce positive changes in our lives. In other words, we learn by observing from others, especially others with secure attachment styles. And number 2, journaling and self-awareness. And that our attachment styles were formed in infancy, our behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are largely autonomic and subconscious. I discussed this briefly in the Part 1 video of this series. Consequently, we may often not be always aware of our thoughts and feelings in certain situations because they're automatic. Practice situational awareness, or in other words, pay attention to situations that make you feel uncomfortable or more anxious. Ask yourself at these times, what am I thinking or what am I feeling? And this is the point where you write your thoughts and or feelings down, or journal. And here's the main reason journaling is important. It's much easier later in the day to review what you wrote simply because you wrote it down. And on that note, later in the day or evening, take your journal out and review your thoughts and feelings. And at this point, practice mindfulness and ask yourself really good questions like, did I not ask to be invited with the group to go to lunch today because I was afraid of being rejected? Or was I being dismissive with my new friend today because I was afraid of getting close? Taking time to write our thoughts and feelings down is an extremely important step in processing them. And remember, confidence isn't thinking you're better than anyone else, it's realizing that you have no reason to compare yourself to others. Confidence is finding your worth without using the measuring tape of comparison. Grace and peace unto you. I'm Dr. Lee.